Jambo, everyone. I'm Mijal Godfrey, your host of the mini podcast series Cross Pollinating Justice. DEI experts for kids and adults share best practices. On today's episode, I am interviewing Dr. Anita Polite-Wilson. She is a C suite trusted advisor who reframes diversity conversations from being difficult to just being different. She mentors and coaches corporate leaders who make diversity, equity, and belonging real for their organizations, which makes employee turnover a thing of the past. And today, Dr. A is going to talk to us about her journey as a strength based coach and about Black jobs. That's tongue in cheek, y'all. But really about how we can prepare our kids to be anything they want to be. And so I'm really excited to jump in this. Welcome, Dr. A.
Hello, Misha. It's good to see you. And hello, community. Thank you for joining us.
Yes. I'm so excited to jump in. But first, for anyone who doesn't know, please tell us, what is a strength-based coach?
Well, I'm glad you asked. Strengths-based coach really help people figure out where they can excel, what their special talents and gifts are, and then figure out, how they can just really live to their fullest. I know we always talk about living our best life, but in order to do that, you really need to understand what your strengths are. So Dr. Donald Clifton is the developer of what's called StrengthsFinder 2.0. And throughout his research, he discovered that there are 34 different categories of strengths. We all have a top 5 or 10 that we lean into. And actually, it's based on our innate talents that when we discover those talents and develop them, they become strengths. So, for instance, if anyone was watching the DNC, the Democratic National Convention last night, it was said several times that one of Vice President Kamala Harris's strengths is empathy. Well, somebody might think, well, that's not a strength. That's just like who you are. Actually, empathy is a strength that falls under the category of relationship building. So when we talk about the 34 strengths, they are put into 4 domains. And those domains are executing, influencing, relationship building, and strategic thinking. So that regardless of what your talents are, regardless of where you excel, it is something that's important. And when I work with C-suite teams, I will have them take the assessment. This is what the grid looks like. And we will actually plot out where they land on the grid so that we can see how many people have the top 1 or 2 strengths in executing, how many have it in influencing, how many have it in relationship building, and how many have it in strategic thinking, so that then we can look at the team and say, you've got a lot in strategic thinking and executing because you're engineers, but not a whole lot in influencing or relationship building. So what strength can you borrow from executing or strategic thinking that will help offset what you don't have in influencing and relationship building? So if I were to do that with a team, I would say that the strength of belief can be leveraged into influencing or relationship building because you believe that all people have value. So that's a really basic foundational understanding of what the strengths are, how they're categorized, and how they can be used for teams. Now, specific to your question about what I do as a coach, when someone takes their strengths profile and learns their top 5 categories, I help them to understand that number one, we are not trying to pigeonhole you. That is not what this is about. Is to say we have identified what your unique talents are. And by the way, no no 2 people have the same top 5 talents, just like none of us have the same fingerprints. No 2 people have the same top talent. So you and I might have the same 5, but they're not in the same order. So we're still unique and different in that sense. And then I spend time helping them figure out, based on what it is that you do for a living, how can you flex your strengths either to do more of that or to do it in a different context, so that now you've got job enrichment, so that you're not bored with what you're doing, but you're finding a new way to use your strengths and do something different to continue to build your skill set.
That's great. So, for a person who's listening, who's a parent or a teacher, I guess I have two questions. One is, are there ways we can help our littles to grow in what they're already showing? And also, is there a way to help them get stronger in areas where they might not be showing strength yet?
Yes, and yes. So to help them understand the ways in which they can develop, there is a student version. It's Amazon, I'm sorry, it's Clifton Strengths for Students, and it's found on Amazon for $23. You get that, make sure it's a brand new book. Don't get a used book, because if you get a used book, you won't have access to the code. Get a brand new book, and typically in the back cover page, there's a code. You will go to the website, you put in the code, you pull up the assessment. Make sure that when you take the assessment, you're not distracted. Make sure that you don't overthink the questions. Anytime we take an assessment or a test, we tend to overthink the questions. Don't do that. Now, before I go any further, let me clarify. Test has a right or wrong answer. 2 plus 2 is not 5. 2 plus 2 is 4. Okay. So a test is the right answer. An assessment tells us what is. So when you take an assessment, make sure you call it an assessment and not a test. Because again, it's not about what's right or wrong with you. That's a test. 2 plus 2 is 4, not 5. An assessment is, what are my innate strengths? How do I show up? What are my particular go-tos in terms of how I interact with other people? So let's always be clear that when we're talking about personality assessments, when we're talking about skills assessments, when we're talking about competency assessments, that we never confuse it with right or wrong. The second thing is, once you take this assessment and you get your results back, it will give you a report that says, these are the key words that most people that have your particular strength resonate with. And here are some ideas about how you can develop these strengths further. And depending on the report that you signed up for, it will also say that if you want to flex your strength in different areas, here are some ideas for you. So I've been using strengths since about, I want to say, but late 1990s, early 2000s. It's been around forever, and it's a tool that I use with all of my clients, whether it's an executive, whether it's a high potential, whether it's a new supervisor, mid-level manager, principal, junior executive. I use it all the way up and down the chain. And it truly does give people a sense of confidence. Too often we get ourselves into situations, especially at work, where we just got graduated and we just need a job. Respect for that, At the same time, let's make sure that we understand who we are and what we bring to the table. So in terms of a different perspective, some people are extroverts, some people are introverts, and some people are ambiverts. They can do either one depending on the situation. If you don't know that you are an introvert and you take a job that requires a whole lot of outward facing interaction, you're probably not going to be too happy, but not know why, because you haven't taken the assessment that lets you know you're an introvert. Or if you're an extrovert and you've taken a job where you're in the office by yourself reading reports, you're not going to be happy either, because you need people. So again, the whole point of an assessment is not to pigeonhole yourself or to categorize yourself, but it's to say, as an introvert, I need a position where I can have time to think. As an extrovert, I need a position where I can go out and be with people. And in terms of my strengths, if I'm strong in influencing and relationship building and I'm an extrovert, then I might need to be on, a media channel. That's how that works.
Okay, that's really helpful. So there is this notion that was brought up in a presidential debate about a black job. And
Yes.
I would love to hear your take on that and your take on what skills are really necessary for our kids going out into the job market in the 21st century.
Interesting that you bring that up. So the first time we heard about black jobs, it was from one of our former presidents, and it was a very disparaging comment. And the implication was, or the inference was, that only low skill work was for black people. I find it very, very interesting that last night, Mrs. Michelle Obama, our former first lady, I hope I can contain my emotion, but when she said, who's going to tell him that the job that he's applying for is a black job, I almost lost it. A Black job is anything you aspire to. That's what a Black job is. A professional position in the C-suite, as an educator, as a doctor, as a fireman, as a policeman, as a professional entertainer, as a professional athlete. Whatever job you take and you happen to be Black, that is a Black job. So do not limit yourself, and please don't let anyone else limit you and say, this category over here is for Black people. I'm sorry, but that's not how it works.
That's absolutely right. So, how can we as parents and teachers start getting our kids and students ready to do whatever they want to do? I've got that song in my head, I can be what I want to be. How can we make that a reality for our kids?
So, and this might be a little controversial, but you asked me, so I'm going to tell you. The first thing we need to realize is that we can't necessarily be what we want to be. If we don't have the talents, and if those talents are not developed into strengths, it's not going to happen. I love to sing, but I'm not going to be the next Beyonce.
Me too,
So,
girl.
right? So we need to be realistic. It's true, you can do whatever you set your mind to, as long as you know what your strengths are, as long as you're developing your strengths, and as long as you are playing to your strengths and leveraging them strategically. That's what it takes. And that's what we need to be training our kids. That's how we need to be talking to them. That being said, whatever you notice about your children, maybe they're verbose, they talk too much, right? That's a strength. And if we're talking about relationship building, well, how else are you going to get to know people unless you're willing to put yourself out there and talk to people? So let's not be so quick to say, well, you can't do this because there's no job in that. These days, you can create a job around anything. I don't know about you, but when I was coming up, you couldn't make six figures being a gamer,
Right? Yes,
but it's a job
absolutely.
now,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
So we need to be very, very careful that we set our kids up for success by taking notice about what they're good at, by figuring it out how that is a strength, by determining how they can develop that strength, and then how they can deploy that strength strategically. I often, when I'm coaching executives, I remind them not to confuse who you are with what you do, because when you're no longer doing that, you lose your identity. However, it is important to achieve what I call who do alignment, is who you are aligned with what you're doing. Again, we're not confusing the two, but we're saying is who you are, your innate gifts, your innate talents that are developed into strengths, being an introvert, being an extrovert, or an ambivert, is who you are aligned with what you're doing as a career choice. And if so, then the sky is the limit.
That is such a great way of looking at it. So I'm thinking though, what if someone's like, my kid needs to have more empathy, right? I know that's one of your strengths, on the scale, on the grid.
Mhm.
How do you build something like empathy in a child who may not seem to come to it naturally?
That's a good question. Let's see. Empathy falls within relationship building. So the other strengths within the domain of relationship building are adaptability, connectedness, developer. Then you've got empathy, harmony, includer, individualization, positivity, and relator. So let's say, back to your example, you don't think that your child is particularly empathetic, but are they able to relate to other people? Are they able to say, as an example, we're Black? Are they able to say, I'm not going to treat my friend this way because they're different, because I know what it's like to be treated that way because I'm different? Or you could go to the includer. Again, if the concern is that they don't have enough empathy, do they tend to want to include people because they don't want them to feel excluded because they know what it feels like to be excluded? So, based on your concern and what's within that particular domain, what other strength can you identify in that child that can help them, perhaps not necessarily build the strength of empathy, but help them to be more aware of others, which is really what empathy is all about.
Oh, that's really great. Yeah, just sort of building around it, even if you can't exactly hit the empathy on the head. I really like that. Now, so what about if I'm dealing with like an introvert who is already feeling excluded for whatever reason at school? Maybe I look different, I talk different, I'm new. How do I get that introvert to take a little more responsibility for their own well-being in a school setting, in a social setting, so that, he or she can really grow?
That's a great question. We need to understand that an introvert does not necessarily mean shy. And before I go any further, there's a book that just came to mind that's a great read. It's called Quiet: The Power of Introverts in a World That Won't Stop Talking. And the author is Susan Cain. Fabulous book. When I read that book as a junior executive, it really changed the way I looked at other people and the way I looked at myself. For instance, and I'm going to get back to your question, I do not necessarily care for networking events. I do not like to go around and collect a bunch of business cards and compare notes and see how many I collected. For me, I'm successful if I go to a networking event, if I connect with one person and we talk for about an hour, and it's not because I've got them hemmed up in a corner, we just have connected and we naturally have a good long dialogue. For me, that's successful because I'm an introvert. Back to your question, if we've got an introvert and we're trying to get them to take a stand for themselves, it's important to realize that introverts are deep thinkers. Their mind is always going. So it's not necessarily that they're shy. They might be thinking of, how can I insert myself into the situation via the path of least resistance? For instance, I want to be in a situation, but I don't want it to be a big deal. And all of a sudden the attention is on me. So when we think about introverts, we need to remember that they're very deep thinkers. They're observant. They're seeing, how can I fit in seamlessly and with the least amount of attention as possible? And then they're looking for a reason to be there. They're looking for a deep connection. Introverts are not going to necessarily want to be at the center of attention. And so to assume that they're off in the corner and I'm worried about my baby's social skills, think of it differently. What are they thinking about? What are they observing? What makes them want to step out and take a leap of faith and introduce themselves to someone? What is going to make them feel safe, which goes back to psychological safety. There are 5 different aspects of psychological safety, and we all need one or another more than the other. So safety is an acronym. The S is security, A is autonomy, F is fairness, E is esteem, and T is trust. I always get those mixed up. So if I didn't spell it right, it's not because I can't spell. I just always get them mixed up.
You spelled
But
it
when we
right.
talk, right? Oh, did I get it right? Okay. So when we talk about safety, I'll use myself as an example. I'm a consultant. I've been a consultant for 6 years, but my high safety need is security. I need to know, where's my check? How much is it going to be so I can write out my bills every month, right? Well, obviously, as a consultant, that level of security is no longer there. But I'm here because I trust the Lord to bring me the work that I'm supposed to have. And that's a whole nother discussion. Autonomy, some people might need to be able to have the ability to get up and just go and do what I need to do. So during the pandemic, when we were all on lockdown, those who had a high need for autonomy, they were climbing the walls because they couldn't go where they wanted to go. They couldn't do what they wanted to do. For those who need a sense of fairness, that's not just fairness for me, but that's fairness for everyone. The sense of esteem says, even though I've been promoted and my esteem is now satisfied, I'm no longer seen as the go-to person because I'm still learning things. And then the trust is, can I trust you to do the right thing by me, just like you can trust me to do the right thing by you? And then the why, to finish out the acronym of safety, is you in particular. Which one of those do you need? So again, the S is security. I may have said safety, but in the model, S is security, A is autonomy, F is fairness, E is esteem, T is trust, and Y is you, the degree to which we as individuals need one of those more or less than the other. So again, going back to an introverted child or young adult feeling safe to venture out, they're strategically thinking about this. Who looks like the safest person for me to risk even introducing myself to, for fear that they're going to reject me or not want to talk to me or not shake my hand? They're being strategic before they make that move.
Wow. That was such a deep dive into it. And I really loved how you reframed introversion. It's not because the person is shy and
Necessarily.
unable, yeah,
Right,
necessarily, right?
right, right.
But that they're trying to figure out, I'm really comfortable here. What's going to make it worth my while to come out of where I am and be over where you are?
And not only what's going to make it worth my while, but more importantly, if I'm comfortable here, what do I need to do strategically to be comfortable moving into someone else's space?
Yes, yes. That's really helpful. That's really
Mhm.
helpful. And I wanted to ask you because another large category seemed to be about I was going to say strategery, about strategy. How do we help look, not just our kids, but our colleagues, ourselves, to become more strategic thinkers? Because I think sometimes taking the long view, thinking about this step and that step is really difficult. And how do we build that up in ourselves and others?
A really simple technique that I use is one when I was getting my bachelor's in organizational leadership. We had as our guest speaker Dr. Henry Cloud. He's a well-renowned psychologist and author and instructor, and he's one of our guest instructors when I was taking my course at Viola. Something that I have never forgotten, and I got my degree about, wow, it was so long ago, I'm not going to tell you. But something that he said was play the movie. So when I work with my clients, back to your point about how do we think more strategically, I'll always tell them play the movie. Based on this situation, if you decide to take this course of action, let's say movie ending A is everyone rides off into the sunset happily ever after. What does that look like when you've made this decision? Movie B is the two star-crossed lovers never get together. What does that look like in your situation? Movie ending C is we never saw that coming. What is the thing that you might never see coming that you need to think about if you make this decision? And I will tell you, it never fails. When people play the movie and give me the different, movie ending A, the perfect ending, movie ending B didn't go quite right, movie ending C, I never saw that. That was a total curveball. It really helps them think more strategically about their decision. That and the willingness to fail fast. And the fact that I've said that is a real growth in me because, like most people, I hate to fail, but I hate to fail to the point of if I haven't calculated at least an 80% success rate in what I'm going to do, I'm just not going to do it. And that's not smart. You have to accept failure as a part of life. However, it's only a failure if you didn't learn from it, like what not to do next time. And I was reading a book and it said that I think Thomas Edison, he was teased about, well, you failed at the light bulb 10,000 times. He said, no, I found 10,000 ways that it won't work. So we really have to reframe failure when we're talking about strategic thinking, how we're going to approach a situation. When we look at playing the movie, if movie ending B or C happens, the worst thing that you can get out of that is not learning from the experience.
Wow. Okay, that's really great too, because I think you can easily talk to any kid too
Mhm.
about think about the movie endings, right? Like most of us are familiar with movies, or just a kid who doesn't watch movies, think about the ending of a book and
Mhm.
really try to plot out what you want the end to be so that
Mhm.
you can get there and avoid some of the missteps that would lead you to, for instance, I never saw that coming.
I think for kids, now think about this. Kids are fearless to a fault, right? Fearless to a fault. They will try anything because they don't know better yet. And when I say they don't know better yet, it's because once you get to a level of adulthood where now you've got responsibility, well, if this doesn't work out, I can't afford it. If the, whatever, we start thinking that way. The kid, if they fall, they just get back up. And typically, and I watch kids, we were not blessed to have kids, but I watched the interactions between kids and parents. And I have noticed that if a kid falls down, the ones that cry are the ones that have parents, oh, my baby, what happened? Are you okay? The ones that don't cry, the parents are like, you good? Okay, let's keep going. And so, similarly, as adults, we have to realize that if this doesn't work out, are you good? Do you still have enough money today to pay your bills? Do you still have a roof over your head? Do you still have enough food in the refrigerator to make it through the week? Do you still have enough right?
Right.
If this doesn't work out, do you still have what you need for today? And again, I'm saying this to myself, just like I'm saying it to you in your community. We have got to go back to that childlike faith that says, if I fall, if it was really bad, I'm gonna cry. But if not, I'm gonna make sure I'm good, dust myself off, and keep rolling because that's what kids do. So when it comes to adults, strategic thinking, failure, we really need to have that childlike fearlessness that says, the worst case is I'll scrape my knee. Scraping your knee could be, okay, so I lost a little bit of an investment. That being said, I know you didn't ask this question, but we need to remember that we've been taught never invest more than what you can afford to lose. So when it comes to taking risks, don't take a bigger risk that you can't afford to recover from, whatever recovery looks like.
That is really good advice. And I just love this whole line of discussion because I'm type A, and as sort of a type A anxious person, I am terrified of failing, but
Yes.
that keeps you paralyzed from doing anything. And, part of what I do now is I give presentations to teachers and parents about how to talk to their kids about race. And one of the reasons people don't do it is because they're paralyzed with fear. What if I mess it up? And my whole thing is just give it a shot. It can't be worse than not saying anything at all.
So
Uh,
let's talk about that for a minute. And I feel like we've kind of been all over the place, but the conversation is just flowing, and that's what I like. I had my goddaughter, she emailed me the other day. She texted me the other day and she said, she said, I've got a neighbor who I'm just now finding out. Well, no, I've known for a little while he's blatantly racist. And she said he came up to me in front of my girls and called me the N-word. And it was a whole different discussion. And I said, first of all, I'm sorry that your neighbor is blatantly racist. I said, I feel for you. I can only imagine what you're going through. Now, she's black, her husband is white, he's of German descent. So now we've got, mixed race children in the mix, and we've got this hatefulness just being spewed at her. But here's what I said, and I really don't know how helpful it was, but I said, you need to remember that blatant racism is based in fear. Because if that man knew you, he wouldn't talk to you like that. If that man knew that you're a medical professional and that if he ever had some kind of medical emergency, you might be the very person to help save his life, he wouldn't talk to you like that. And I said, that's a learned behavior that you're not going to get past unless he's willing to have a conversation. And so, to your point about how to talk to young people about race, to your point about how I position myself as a facilitator who helps reframe diversity conversations from difficult to different, it first starts by meeting people where they are. And meeting people where they are means recognizing you've been raised with this mindset, you're well past 50, and you're most likely not going to change. So I'm not going to waste my breath. Or you're well past 50, you've been raised with this mindset, but I see you're curious. Let's have a conversation. Meeting people where they are helps us protect ourselves when we're trying to do this work, because this is work that is personal and it can be painful. Trust me, as someone who's done this work for the better part of 5 years, and I'm still new in it, it will take a personal toll on you unless you're strategic, the word that you used, unless you're strategic about being able to know for yourself who to approach based on your willingness to meet them where they are.
mm, that is a lot.
Mhm.
From your friend's experience to your experiences doing these trainings over the years. One reason it took me so long to come back to doing race work essentially is because I am so sensitive and I get my feelings hurt. And I
Mhm.
wonder, how do you Even knowing that you're meeting people where they are, how do you keep from getting really frustrated or really disappointed in where we find ourselves rather than where we could be if folks just sort of believed us or thought of all people as being made in the image of God and worthy of being treated well.
So to your point, I have stepped away from the work for about a year. I have not actively done or pursued the work with a client. When I first started my practice in leadership development, career training, and team dynamic strategies, it was that. But where the conversation had a space, we would have appropriate conversations around race. And then I went full into it. And now I'm stepping back. I no longer lead with diversity, inclusion, and belonging. I lead with preparing businesses to navigate culture, complexity, and change. Because when you talk about culture, that is a natural segue into diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging based on your read of the crowd, based on people's willingness to meet themselves where they are. Notice I said based on people's willingness to meet themselves where they are. And just the other day, someone shared with me 4 thoughts, which I absolutely loved. I'm sure it's not original, but I loved it. I'd never heard of it before. Diversity is a fact. And I don't care what we say about making America great again. For some people, making America great again means only a certain segment of the population is going to have the space to achieve. But diversity is a fact. We're not going back to the way that used to look, right? Equity, let me make sure I get this right because I actually taped it to the back of my laptop. Diversity is a fact, equity is a choice, inclusion is an action, and belonging is an outcome. And for just a minute, yeah, isn't that strong? I'm going to say it
Yes.
again. Diversity is a fact, equity is a choice, inclusion is an action, and belonging is an outcome. And I have been a proponent of belonging for over 20 years, and it's just now really trending everywhere, not just the workplace, but everywhere. You hear people talk about belonging a lot. And again, I want to say late 1990s, early 2000s, I came across an article. It was a young man, happened to be white. He was being interviewed about his college search. And he said, I chose this college because I felt like I belonged. Everybody wants to feel like they belong. So when I have these discussions, I always reinforce the fact that I value every voice. And I specifically call out white males to say, your voice is just as important because I understand based on the conversations that I've had with some of you, you feel like everybody blames you. You feel like everybody thinks it's your fault. You feel like nobody wants to hear your voice. And you feel like nobody wants to believe you when you get into the work and get so excited that on occasion you want to drive the bus. We talk about everybody getting on the bus and being in the right seat, right? And I know that if I had not said that in one particular instance, and this was all in one session, there was a white guy that said, I'm not sure I buy into this, but I have to be here. My response to him was, thank you. Somebody else would have said, well, if you don't want to be here, there's the door. But
Yeah,
then that's not, no, but then that's not valuing every voice,
that's right.
right? So I have to say thank you for your honesty. But because he said that, I was paying attention to another white male in the classroom, and it seemed like he was really disengaged. So I'm thinking to myself, already, I need to have a chat with him at lunch. Somebody said something, and he said, being in here having this discussion, I'm starting to see why my little girl getting her hair done is such a big deal. His little girl was Black. You would not have known that.
Love it. Yes.
Because he shared that story. Another white male in the class said, wow, I always thought it was cool that you had a Black daughter, but I didn't know what came with that, meaning the things that he shared.
Yep.
And then another white guy in the same class said, I know what it's like because my adopted brother, who's been in the family for years, is Black. So I get the whole racial profiling, being afraid to be stopped by the cops. Had I not invited the voice of the white guy who said, I'm not sure I believe in this, do you think those other 3 white males would have shared those powerful stories?
No, they wouldn't
No,
have had that sense of safety.
they
That's
would not have. So again, when we talk about meeting people where they are, we have to give them the space and the grace to be willing to meet themselves where they are to be honest about it, to be safe with it, and to also extend grace to others, just as we extend grace to ourselves. So early on, you said, what do I do if I don't get it right? Say, you know what? I didn't get it right. What can I do next time? And keep rolling because we're never going to get it right. Even as a facilitator, I don't always get it right. And I use those opportunities as object lessons in the classroom to let them know nobody's got a real handle on this because we're all human. So we're all learning it together. And unless we extend grace to ourselves when we get it wrong, unless we extend grace to each other when we get it wrong, and extending grace means calling people into the knowledge of what they've done and the impact that they've had without calling them out for being human. There's a difference.
Right. Yes. That's yes, yes, there is a difference between calling somebody out and trying to make them feel bad for the thing that they did wrong versus saying, listen, I'm going to call you in. I want you to
Yes.
remain in community with me, and I need you to see the damage that your actions have made. And then you
Or your words.
decide, you're
Yeah.
right. And then, like, you decide how you're going to manage yourself from that point on.
So now we're talking about managing the intent of our words and actions with the impact that they have on people. And I'll give you a really quick example. Last week I was at a board meeting and one of the leaders was talking about, how to interact better with their leaders and develop them. And there were two words on the slide. One was lower management versus upper middle management. I said, well, first of all, let's change that designation to frontline management, middle management, and upper management because words have impact. And then the other thing they said was, well, uh, how do we cascade tribal knowledge? I said, okay, let's look at that. Okay, we're not even going to get into the whole connotations with Native Americans. But when you use the term tribal knowledge, now you're automatically setting up in groups versus out groups. And if this in group only has this tribal knowledge, and I feel like I'm the out group, then how likely are you to share that knowledge with me? But if we use the term institutional knowledge, then it's knowledge based on the operations of the organization that should be accessible to everyone versus
Yes,
tribal knowledge, right?
yes,
And he said, and these are primarily white guys sitting around the boardroom. And he said, I see that and I never thought about it before. And afterwards, the CFO said to me, that was really powerful. And I'm aware of that. And I'm going to change that, on the slide deck. So again, it goes back to the intent and managing the intent with the impact that our words and actions have, regardless of our ignorance or intelligence around what we're doing.
yes, yes. Um, and and this notion that your intent can be very separate from your impact, and that we need to be more mindful of trying to marry our intent with our impact.
Yes.
Thank you so much for that. Um, and,
Mhm.
and I know I'm going a little bit long, but I have to ask you this HR question because
Okay.
I know that you're talking to and working with all these people in the C-suite, and they're sort of learning how to manage different people, different cultures, different backgrounds in their companies. Do they understand this notion of belonging from an HR point of view? From it's so much harder to have to rehire and retrain people or to have people on staff who are just feeling depleted and demoralized. Like are people starting to make that connection and really being able to make changes based on seeing that connection?
So, full disclosure, I am not an HR professional. My PhD is in human and organization systems. So I'm more familiar with HR practices than most people would be. That said, based on the work that I do, the research that I conduct, the trends that I see, it's a slow process to get executives to understand that because we have to remember from the front lines to the C-suite, it's a very different perspective. It's a very different viewpoint. You're looking at strategy and how can we stay in business. At the front levels, we're doing what it takes to implement your strategy and stay in business. And so sometimes they forget. I will also say that oftentimes in the C-suite, they don't have a sense of belonging amongst themselves because at that level, it is so competitive that transparency is sometimes seen as a weakness. So, to answer your question about whether or not they're making a connection to belonging and success of the organization, they're still having to get their own foundations of trust together as a C-suite. And I'm just being honest, based on my experience, based on what I see, based on the C-suite teams that I've worked with, that's the challenge. And so if they can't get it together at that level, good luck trying to get it to cascade to this level.
Wow. That is so deep. When I tell you, I never thought of that, because we look from the outside in, right? And we're thinking, oh, they just have all this negative intent. They want people to be miserable. They're trying to run out people of color. They're trying to run out the women. And that might be the case somewhere.
Might
But
be.
many places, the people who are charged with running the organization aren't even aligned. And
That's
so
right.
that obviously trickles down and makes the rest difficult to handle.
It does. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for that perspective because it's one
Yeah.
I had never even thought of.
Mhm.
So, Dr. A, I want you to tell our listeners where they can find more of you. How can they reach you? How can you help them? I'm going to include everything in the show notes, but I do want you to just tell us right now, how can we find more of you?
Well, first of all, Misha, I want to thank you for sharing your platform with me, for inviting me to come on. I know that this was supposed to be about strengths and our young people, and we just kind of went everywhere, but I love these kinds of organic conversations. So thank you and God bless you for the work that you're doing, not only for young people, but for their parents and professionals. I really appreciate you. I can be found at dranita.com. You need to spell out the word doctor, doctoranita.com. That is my website. And if you want to email me, it's Anita at dranita.com. And again, you need to spell it out. And then if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, and I really hope you do, it's Anita Polite-Wilson, PhD. And here's what I want as many people who are interested to connect with me on LinkedIn. Every Saturday, I drop a podcast called Real Conversations from the C-Suite. Actually, it's called Keeping It Real with Dr. Anita. At the beginning of every month, I kind of set up the dialogue for the rest of the month. And in that case, it's called Real Conversations from the C-Suite. I have a conversation with a C-suite leader about leadership, about culture, about diversity, inclusion, and belonging. And you really get C-suite insights, which is why it's called Real Conversations from the C-Suite. So please join me on LinkedIn, connect with me, and then pay attention to the podcasts that drop every Saturday. They're never more than 10 to 15 minutes. It's a continuation of a dialogue with a C-suite executive. And earlier this month, I kicked off a mini monologue series. It's running through this month and all of September, just giving folks a little bit of insight into the origins of my business, where I have taken it from leadership development to diversity, inclusion, and belonging. We're looking at AI in the workplace, and then back to culture, complexity, and change. So for your listeners who are not familiar with me, if you go back to the LinkedIn and search for that first Saturday in August, and then continue on through the rest of September, you'll get a real good taste of who I am, what I do, and how I might be able to help.
Thank you so much. Y'all dig in there and get your content for the next several weeks and then just keep up with Dr. A. Thank you again so much. I have loved talking to you, and I'm so glad I get to share you with all of our listeners and folks watching on YouTube.
Thank you, Misha. And I know this will not be our last conversation, correct?
No, it will not. Y'all
All
stay
right.
tuned. There will be more. Thank
I
you.
mean, and we are colleagues in the fight, right? We're colleagues in the work. We're fighting the good fight. And when we fight, we what?
Win
There it is.
now. Bye, y'all.